Hey guys, this is miicrow here. I wanted to talk about season 5 in terms of its successes, failures, where it should go from here, and just the general outlook of New World at this point. Season 5 featured Slayer script, basically, and rewrote the entire combat engine of the game to use this Slayer script, which is much easier to debug for AGS internally, since it's written in a non proprietary manner, written in C++. So AGS is actually able to debug what is going on and fix key issues much faster. I think we've seen people see those changes get fixed much faster. We've seen changes come in within the last 48 hours in terms of hotfixes that fix really, really key issues in the game. And in general, people are surprised by the speed of which the AGS has been able to respond and fix issues, which has been really, really good. The post-launch experience of this patch has been fantastic in terms of how the devs have gone above and beyond, the community managers have gone above and beyond, and everyone that seems like they're involved from AGS at this point has kind of put in the extra time and effort, which was clearly needed to happen. I'll say that in regards, but they did commit to, the 11, 12-hour workday that everyone dreads when it happens, but sometimes it happens because shit hits the fan. Like, they definitely stepped up and provided that. I don't think I've seen as many people involved in my streaming stuff in terms of like late at night that are like working together to try to solve issues as what happened yesterday. I think I saw as many as 40 to 50 people on this sheet alone trying to kind of either address issues that we kind of documented in terms of bugs for AGS in a manner that might be a little bit easier than their Discord. And just in general, the community really just came together to try to help AGS solve these issues in hindsight. The new artifacts feel very, very good. They're very popular. I wouldn't say that every single one is perfect, but they all have a very unique play style. And that's something that I think was kind of lacking in the past, where you really had to build around, you have to build around all of these artifacts to make them good. They aren't just necessarily just straight upgrades right off the bat. They're not just like, okay, I slapped in this artifact and I just became better. Like, all of them have like a unique mechanic that you have to build around, and that's something I think that New World is able to take advantage of because all the builds within New World are just very creative. Like Nature's Wrath, for example, having to deal around the challenge of not having a temporary empower is not a very easy thing to deal with, and people have figured out very weird ways to get those empowers to stay on, like as in running Tether, because that does not expire anymore, or doing something like running Rune Glass in your armor, which historically was kind of taboo. And they have really tried to figure out ways to maximize as much empower as they could passively while still taking advantage of the damage provided by Nature's Wrath. I think that was really, really cool to see happen. OPR feels a lot better in terms of how it plays overall. It is much faster paced. OPR, you're able to kind of zoom from the actual original base to be in about 10 to 20 seconds instead of in about a minute, which just makes everything within the game much more accessible. Like, you're able to rotate to Baron, able to rotate to Brute, able to back cap easier. I think all of those are positive in the future outlook. Some people may be annoyed because the OPRs are lasting longer, but I think that issue will go away with time as matchmaking, which we've seen data mined, gets rolled out, and we see more balanced games within OPR. I think this just overall will be a very big improvement. Abilities and attacks that previously felt really bad now feel really good. So the one that really sticks out to me, albeit this character doesn't have Warhammer leveled, is the Warhammer. Warhammer attacks like the half heavy attack were just not connecting before. Wrecking Ball didn't feel like super responsive. Armor Breaker felt good, but I don't think it felt as good as this patch. Like, across the board, with the exception of Shockwave, a Warhammer feels better than it did in the past, as well as a lot of other weapons on this list. Just like down this, all basically every single weapon feels more responsive. Like, even Void Blade to me feels better, and Void Blade has not felt good in a very long time, and it feels pretty significantly better than it did in the past, and it feels like that's all kind of a step in the right direction. The end game loop too, I would say, is improved with the addition of going for fish-based foods, or alternatively, killing Stanley a bunch, rest in peace, and acquiring that roasted rabbit with seasoned vegetables for those extra stats. We have magnify changes that rolled out that allows you to really figure out, you can just kind of go between modes and not really have to worry about the stats as much. You can respec now, and that's a lot cheaper. It only costs 50 gold, so 200. So in general, you're able to engage with more activities with and be more creative with your builds, with it being less punishing to try to do so, which I think is just a big benefit from New World overall, as well as with the magnified change. It just opens up so much more, or so many more gear possibilities that you couldn't go for in the past. Like if you were a player that ran a combination of attribute bonuses that were very close to get together, like if you ran like, I don't know, like 300 int, for example, if you're a Void Goblin player and you ran 300 int and you ran 50 focus and you ran 200 con, then you're limited to only running 3 magnified pieces, which means you can only run your artifacts basically. And now it's much more open, since you could put that magnified towards any kind of individual stat. You're able to use these pieces that were not usable in the past, and allows you to have more creative builds. And I think that is just overall very, very positive. And then there's a good amount of players that have tried this patch since the launch too. Like before in Season 4, I think at a certain point we were like sub 8k players. Like, I went back up to like 12, 13k peak within a day. That's a pretty significant jump for a game that is just generally on a downward trend. That being said, I don't know what the retention will be due to the rather transitioning here to the more sour part of this, the poor state of the launch. It's very clear, and I don't think anyone could argue with this at this point, that if they could argue this in the past even, that AGS's quality assurance team, QA, needs more resources. I think that they likely have the lower level down in terms of, the game came out and it didn't immediately break, so that's good. But in terms of testing individual interactions, it just wasn't there, and like testing things that probably should have been caught did not feel like it was there. Like, for example, a Life Taker is dealing void damage, name damage right now instead of void damage, which is causing a whole host of interactions to occur, where this is just basically the best DPS weapon in the game right now. Likely the best DPS weapon that New World has ever had, and it has made it very, very frustrating to the point where it's almost unplayable to play OPR or War because of how powerful Life Taker is. Because it's not a void damage or an actual damage type, resistances don't really work towards this, and you just pump. Like, Life Taker is dealing like 2 to 3, I think it's closer to 2 times as much damage as a normal VG is right now, and it is absolutely scary, and it is definitely changing the meta, but it's something that should have been caught by any sort of unit test that was like, hey, this player has a Void Gauntlet. A Void Gauntlet should deal void damage. It's like, okay, why was that not caught? Like, come on. Like, that's a gimme. That's a teacher throws in the opportunity to test for that for free points on any sort of like CS related course. Like, if you had that unit test, you get free points there. Like, that was a gimme. Like, there's stuff like that obviously needs to be fixed that was not fixed, and is something that I think AGS knows they need to fix in the future, and it's something that I expect them to dedicate more resources towards QA. And if it shows anything, you could see players surge back, and then you could see players wane away after every single patch that QA kind of fails at this. And even though QA doesn't necessarily derive revenue itself, the keeping players engaged for a longer period of time will drive revenue in terms of other fashions. So I don't see why, from a business perspective, it would not make sense to kind of get that QA back in a spot that is, acceptable and not an embarrassment whenever you talk about or name drop a game. And it's something that I think could be reversed and help to be reversed in the future with this addition of C++ oriented Slayer script, because that will allow AGS to write unit tests for more combat related bugs, so that if they were to change in the future, it would be caught. Because it's clear that a git diff is not enough to catch everything, since the bugs that happen are just, the changes that happen are just so plentiful that it's just impossible to check everything. So it's something that it's very clear that there needs to be some sort of test suite that's implemented, and I think this patch alone kind of showed that off into something that I'm excited to see where it goes, because I think that launches in the future will generally be better. On top of this, the other thing that we see that kind of points in this direction of launches need to be better is that New World is very likely going to be coming out on console. We've seen stuff about this, and the thing with a console platform in terms of working with Sony or working with Microsoft is they're probably not going to let you release a patch overnight for something that they haven't QA validated. Like I don't think that's really a thing, or if it is a thing, it's only within the first 2 to 3 days for a hotfix. It's a very short window. So that's something that AGS like needs to get used to now. And I think this is like kind of a wake up call. Like it's a, hey, we need to actually launch our patches correctly. Like it's almost a thing where you're happy that AGS failed because this sounds all sorts of alarms and is something that drives change, if that makes sense. Like that's how I'm viewing this patch. Even though it was such a big failure, it was such a big failure in such a kind of alarming way that I think it will drive change in the future for the better of the game as a whole. The other thing that kind of came out from this is that hot fixes, we are getting them for key issues, and I think that is important, but there's still so many bugs that need to be addressed, and something that I don't think is really being emphasized too much yet by a ton of players. But I think within the first 48 hours, we caught 100 to 150 bugs. We put 70 down on this sheet. There were more here at one point, and I deleted some of them because there were repeats. And then within the actual Discord for AGS themselves, within the bug reports, it feels like there's a bug report that's created like every 15, like at least one every 15 minutes for the last 48 hours. And most of them are somewhat different, albeit a lot of them are duplicates or some of them aren't fully explained. Like, and I think some of them, the intent was clear, but it didn't fully get there. And I'm a victim of this as well. For example, one thing I noticed yesterday is I was the person that, I think the first person that realized that Void Gauntlet was bugged. I went into an OPR, I realized that someone threw an orb at me, and that orb hit me for 3k. From a feeling perspective, I want to like break this up into like how like a bug report, like translating from a player feedback to an actual bug report kind of works. Like from a feeling perspective, if you don't have a unit test, I feel like I'm taking more damage, right? So then I'm going to look through every single instance that possibly could cause me to take more damage. And this is something where a unit test would have been really, really helpful, because we tested rend, we made sure that was new rend and not old rend. We tested like armor to make sure it was working correctly. We tested resistances. We basically went down the line and tested everything. And then we're like, wait a second, we can't see damage numbers. If we can't see damage numbers, that means damage isn't being displayed. If damage isn't being displayed, that means we're probably doing something funky with the damage. And then sure enough, we track down, okay, it's a Void Gauntlet. I don't think every Void Gauntlet's behaving this way, so let's look at Life Taker because it's one artifact, and then we see that this is bugged. Like, there's a lesson to be learned there from translating, like, player feedback to actually figuring out what a problem is, and I think it stems from, like, that feeling, if that makes sense, and that's something that doesn't normally translate, like, in terms of other things, but when players have played the game for 3 to 4k hours, and they tell you something feels wrong, it's probably because something's broken. And I think that is something that could be worked on a bit better in terms of how do we data mine from a feeling, if that makes sense. Or maybe not even use feelings, and we collect data before a patch, we collect data after a patch, and compare relatively quickly. Like, for example, if AGS had a metric that was seeing time to kill or damage done with an ability rotation from a certain weapon for a standardized piece of gear, and then they saw that damage increase dramatically for a certain weapon like a Void Gauntlet, not just because, and then from there they can like look at Void Gauntlet stats and then kind of break it out into more things. Like I think there's some sort of test suite that could have been implemented to like kind of catch on to figuring out what was wrong based off of feelings, if that makes sense. Like there's something, there are tools that exist that can solve those issues, as well as even AI itself can solve that issue in terms of figuring out from like a neural network, hey, if more stuff is like, if there's more damage in the pool from these weapons, something changed here, and let's figure out what changed. Like there's tools there that exist that could be leveraged to kind of improve that process. I might not be able to like name every single tool that could do that because I'm not someone that's super experienced in this industry, but I could tell you that there's improvements that could be dealt with from there. I think that in terms of the outlook, though, as a whole, New World will be better in the long run because of this patch. I think in the short run, so like within this season and next season, I expect the player pop to peak at what AGS is not happy describing, but players will happily describe as a one-day average peak at So like if you look at the span over one day across all regions, the peak player count would peak at about 5 to 7K. I expect that within this season, just because the initial patch was bad enough to where I think people are going to consider other games. And unlike things in the past, it turns out there's like actually a decent amount of pretty popular good games right now for people to choose between. And I don't know if New World's necessarily going to be the front runner for people after like a patch like this. I still think it's going to be better in the long term. It might be better even for games beyond this in terms of looking at Lord of the Rings, but that's something we have to consider in terms of the future outlook. And then I would generally recommend, if you are a PvP player, to probably not play this game for the next 3 to 5 days until most of the bugs are really ironed out. Wars in general, even though you see this in conflict here and you see a small push here, are being completely postponed. Players are refusing to do wars, which should be a sign of how broken the game feels like it is. A lot of players are not really willing to do OPR with the current amount of exploits that are going on as well, or 3v3, just because there are too many things to really like it's just too much. Like you just take way too much damage right now because of this Void Gauntlet bug. And there might be other bugs that are similar to that, albeit I couldn't find any, that are putting the game in a similar spot where damage is just increased in a patch where it should be decreased, considering that we just had heavy get its base damage nerfed, medium get its base damage nerfed, and light get its base damage nerfed, unless you're a light melee, which at this point, if you're a light melee playing the game last patch and this patch, you are a unicorn, and I wish you the best of luck, but that is a very tough class to play effectively right now. And just overall, the game's damage should have decreased, but instead it increased because of recent bugs. But I don't know if that makes complete sense to everyone here, but I just kind of wanted to go through that and kind of go through what's happened in the last 48 hours, because it's been a lot. If you guys have other bugs that you want to add, shout out to AGS for actually looking at this, because I threw this together last minute as like just a way to track bugs, because it feels like there's so many, and it was just hard to keep track in that Discord of what was going on. But if you guys have more bugs, feel free to put them on here. I'll put like the edit link in the description. I could always roll this back if someone like sabotages this list. So that's something that's nice. But if AGS likes this approach better than their current approach, I would probably recommend doing like a Google forum kind of setup, where someone submits a forum thing and that gets transmitted to a CSV or a datasheet, and then from there you can kind of go through and figure out what is going wrong. But I don't know if that's necessarily strictly better than what they have in a Discord. It's just something that I thought was a little bit easier to keep track of stuff rather than, you know, looking through every single message here and taking each message, trying to transfer it to a readable format down into a list sort of thing so you can go through and check stuff off, to just start with a list and work your way down from there. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think of the current season. If you think that this is going to be the end of New World because the launch was so bad, or if you think this will be better for New World because the failure will spark change of sorts. And with that being said, I will see you guys later. Peace.